Greetings. This is I Am Vermont 2, and my name is Sha'an Moulier. I Am Vermont 2 is modeled after the I Too Am Harvard initiative. The I Am Vermont 2 photo story project shines a light on the diversity of identities and experiences of Black and Indigenous people of color all across the state of Vermont. The I Am Vermont 2 project is a medium for BIPOC to tell our stories and convey how racism has a significant impact in our lives. This is the first known statewide multi-generation project done only by Black and Indigenous people of color living, working, and attending school in Vermont. Social justice activist Grace Lee Boggs said, "Creativity is the key to human liberation." A poem. I Hold No Grudge by Nina Simone. I hold no grudge, there's no resentment underneath. I'll extend the laurel wreath and we'll be friends, but right there is where it ends. I hold no grudge, and I'll forgive you your mistake. But forgive me if I take it all to heart and make sure that it doesn't start again. Yes, I'm the kind of people you can step on for a little while, but when I call it quits, baby, that's it. I'm the kind of people you can hurt once in a while, but crawling just ain't my style. I hold no grudge. Deep inside of me, there's no regrets. But a gal who's been forgiven but a gal who's been forgotten may forgive, but never once forget. My guest today is Steffen Gillom. I first met Steffen as part of a Vermont statewide BIPOC caucus retreat planning committee. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome you to the program, and thank you for being here. Before you tell our viewers about yourself, can you share what it was like to be asked to be a guest on today's program?
Yes, well, thank you for having me first and foremost. And it was a wonderful surprise. You know, I've been so happy to see I Am Vermont 2 growing and the way you've spearheaded this initiative and brought it, you know, from that retreat and maybe even before to the statewide sort of powerhouse initiative has been nothing short of amazing. So I'm glad that it's my turn to come on and be on the show, and I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thank you, and it has been a delightful pleasure to see your journey and your blossom and how you branch out. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
Okay, well, you know, my name is Steffen, as everyone knows, even though it's kind of spelled, the spelling throws folks off, so I have to tell everybody. But you know, you got it right. So many don't. And my and I am originally from just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. So it's funny because on the map it's the Midwest, but anybody who lives there knows it's more of the South than anything else. But it's not the deep South. There is a distinction there. I am also multiracial. So I am black and white. I do identify as black biracial, specifically depending on the context. A lot of times, uh, it might dictate how I slip in and out of those identities and how much I identify with one or the other. Um, and I came from a pretty large family, and the majority of my family hails from the deep south. So, does that cover it, or should I go on a little
Well,
further?
if you'd like to tell us what brought you to Vermont, what attracted you to Vermont?
Yeah, so it's interesting how I got here in Vermont. So growing up in a pretty diverse community, I cannot lie, Vermont was not a state that I heard much about in the discourse. Um, but what ended up happening was that I guess going way back, but not too far back, all the way in undergrad, which for me seems like a long time ago, I had decided that I was going to either do ROTC, which I did do, and go into the military route, or I was going to go into the humanitarian service route. Well, I have a lot of service members in my family, particularly women, um, that were able to bring themselves up. So I was always inspired by that. And so I tried out ROTC. Um, and I liked it for the most part, but I also just could feel in my spirit that it really wasn't the way that I wanted to serve or give back. So I actually went into humanitarian service, which landed me actually in Kansas City, Missouri. I didn't do Peace Corps. I did AmeriCorps, which is the sister of Peace Corps, but on the domestic side of things. And I was working actually for education portfolios there. And in the whole mix of that, and even before I had met this woman named Patricia Eisenhausen, which now she's Patricia Riley, I believe. And she was a Peace Corps volunteer. And she had heard about SIT, or the School for International Training in Vermont, because that used to be the original language training grounds for Peace Corps volunteers. And a lot of people who were in the service sector, right, where there would be Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, City Air, et cetera, would funnel there. I had never heard about it, but I was doing my service there, and I talked to her on the phone, and she said, Stefan, this would be a great school for you. You should check it out. And I said, I don't know if I want to go to grad school. I like what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. And long story short, I looked at it. These programs seemed pretty cool. I applied, and within 2 weeks, I was accepted. And within 2 more weeks, I was in my car, actually. No, actually, I was on a plane. I flew in the first time. I was on a plane flying up to Vermont. And I went to school here. And I started to notice that I started to get more into the community. And so I said, okay, well, let me get a little bit more involved. And so I slowly, gradually kind of graduated from being a student that was in Vermont to being a resident in Vermont, who realized that there was a vibrant community of color here and a vibrant community in a lot of ways here, but that community just didn't have as much voice or presence as others in the community.
Thank you. And so the Brattleboro area offers resources, as you said, educational resources. Uh, I served for 4 years in AmeriCorps and in the Northeast Kingdom. And again, a wonderful way to, I say, serve your community, working as a literacy outreach coordinator for preschoolers. And another way of bringing to light the resources that communities have of BIPOC folk who feel comfortable in coming out and being seen. Because for many, they're not as visible, that they're here. So what are your interests, your passions? What do you like to do for pleasure and joy?
Oh my goodness. So that is a hard question. And I thought a little bit about that question. I've been asked the question before, and I don't think I ever answer it the same twice because it changes as I grow older and hopefully wiser. I would say that my first love actually was insects and plants. I used to really love insects and plants, and I still love to research and learn about and deal with different types of insects and plants. I also love to cook. So cooking, botany, things like that are really fascinating to me and have kind of led me into my activism with environmental justice, quite a bit of environmental justice activism because of those passions and just really understanding how connected we are to the smallest creatures in the world, really. I mean, besides things like viruses, but the smallest, insects and things like that and how pivotal they are. But I would say that as I grew, and different parts of me developed, I also really developed a love for hanging out with friends, for spending time with family, especially as you move away. You learn how much you grow to appreciate them, to having, and making long lasting community ties. I think that even if I was to get up and leave tomorrow, would be everlasting. These are things that I think have brought me a lot of joy as I've gotten older. And I mean, there's so much more, but I guess I would leave it. I guess I would leave it there. And of course, giving back. I never thought that giving back would bring me so much joy, but it has. And it's interesting because I was just having a conversation with my partner, and I was telling him, I said, the thing that has brought me the most joy in this life, because it's been the biggest blessing to me, has been being kind to others, because there are so many people in the world who are not kind to others, that when someone is kind to you, you feel it. And it reminded me of this quote, or I guess it's a quote, and I might butcher it, but I think it's by Maya Angelou, and it says that people might not remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, ironically enough, being kind to others also has made me feel good as well. They don't talk much about that part.
And your ability to integrate your passion with service, and you're pretty notable in part of your service into your community. If you wouldn't mind sharing your position, I'm talking about the NAACP, and I say it in that not too long ago there wasn't any NAACP existence in Vermont, and it isn't until recently that there has been, and especially in your neck of the woods. So if you just briefly want to touch on that.
Yeah, so to keep it short and brief, it has been an honor for me to serve as president of the Windham County branch of the NAACP. And as you said, there was no NAACP in Windham County specifically, or really even in Vermont. A little known fact is that I think sometime in the 60s, there was a couple of folks who did try to create a branch. You got a little something going, but like you were saying, it didn't really seem like it had lasted the legacy. Maybe it was because technology wasn't what it is now, back then. But Tabitha Moore and I, and a lot of people I think know who she is. She used to be the former president of the Rutland branch. We set out sort of together, hand in hand, to establish these branches. And, boy, did we. We established two very strong and vibrant branches. But what we also set out to do, and we've been successful in doing, is, creating a statewide network so that the NAACP is sitting on a lot of these important committees, boards, all across the state, so that, on a structural level, there is some sort of advocacy. After Tabitha left, another sister of mine, who's now my sister president, Mia Schultz, took over, and she's also done a wonderful job in not only continuing the mission, but pushing it forward. And so together, as we work together, from our different perspectives and spheres, we've really been able to bolster the NAACP. But yeah, there's never been one here in Windham County at all, and we got it all set up. It took a lot of work, but we've been able to do a lot of good things after its infusion into the community.
Wonderful. So, what has been the impact of racism for you living here in Vermont?
You know, when I think about that question, a lot of things come to mind that it's almost like a soup or something. There's a lot of things on the surface that you see, but that really wasn't or isn't what the biggest impact is for me. I think the biggest impact for me has been psychological, right? I've noticed attitudinal changes in myself that I wasn't even aware of until I was in certain situations, right, where I was less outgoing than I used to be, or where I felt myself having responses that were not like me, right? So questioning why certain questions were asked, you know, questioning what was the reason, and sometimes having to call out, you know, essentially microaggressions that were happening. These were things that I experienced growing up as a queer person, but not necessarily as much around my racial identity. There were other things that I had to deal with being biracial, but you know, I didn't grow up in a predominantly white community, so for me, that was new for me, and so that psychological impact, I think has been the biggest impact.
Thank you. If you can describe a microaggression briefly and how it made you feel at the time.
Yeah, so let me think. There was a couple of microaggressions that I could really pull up, but I think one of the biggest microaggressions that I have really gone through is being perceived as angry, right? So I was just at a summit. I guess I won't even say what summit it was. It might be too identifiable, but I was at a summit not too long ago, and the person there had tried to get a hold of me, and they had emailed me through the wrong email. They didn't know that, right? And they came up and sort of accosted me at the at the event, and told me that they didn't hear back from me, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry about that," and I said, "Well," and they said, "Well, something to the effect of, well, we don't really hear much from you, and it's been really hard to get a hold of you." And I said, "Well, kind of made a joke, and I said, well, you might have to get in line a little bit, because I have a lot of people reaching out for a lot of things. And I try to prioritize members of the BIPOC community, which is still in itself a struggle. And that was taken as, I guess, aggression. And so for me, the microaggression kind of wraps into your previous question around the psychological impacts, because growing up, Black in America, you're always aware of your body and the positioning of your body, right, in rooms. I'm 6 foot tall, Black male, but at the same time, you don't really get used to the range being so small that you're allowed to have range being the range of emotional expression. And so for me, I try to make a joke out of a sticky situation because I was surprised by the rudeness of it, especially when they got my email wrong. However, I realized in that moment that it didn't really matter what my response was, because aggression was what they were looking for and expecting from me. So everything was going to be taken that way. And so for me, that was and continues to be, moments like that continue to be eye-opening to the very small, minute happenings, in the Black experience.
So I'm not wanting to put words in your mouth. I think I'm hearing awareness you're feeling. Is there something else that in that moment that you're feeling?
Yes. It was an awkward moment, and everyone around was standing there staring at me and this other person. And I could tell that those other white folks, they were uncomfortable, but they didn't really know what to say. And the other person of color that was standing there was surprised and also offended at the way that I was being spoken to. but it's a professional event, and at the end of the day, like I said, the range is small for how we are not allowed, but how we kind of feel we can react without it being, a mole hill being blown into a mountain, right? So yeah, it was awareness or even a hypervigilance of my
Thank you.
positionality in the room.
Exactly, exactly. So in that moment, what did you need?
I think in that moment, to be honest, I would have loved for someone to say something. But that's okay. I one thing about being, and I'm sure as being, black in the US is that we are definitely resilient and that we can overcome a lot, of situations that I think some others might, be sent to the bathroom crying over. I just internalized it, said, you know what, I'm going to process that later. I have the skills to do that. And I went on about my day. But to answer your question, in that moment, I would have loved for someone to say, my God, that was so rude, you know? Or why would you make those types of comments to him? What made you feel like you could do that? What made you feel like you had the right to interrupt him and hold him in that way? I'm not a publicly elected official. It's just like, why is this happening right now? If I was, okay, it's the name of the game, but I'm not. I'm a civil rights advocate, and we try our best, but there are things that slip through the cracks.
Yeah, sort of having support from your environment. What barriers, if any, do you think you might have put up because of racial microaggressions?
Well, I think that the barriers have been external and internal, but I'll start with the internal barriers. Okay, my headphones are trying to fly out my ears. So I would say internally, I have just become more introverted than I'm used to. Even before the pandemic, I've become a lot more careful with what I say. I always was the kind of person who tried to think before I speak anyway. But I had to realize that a lot of the phrases and a lot of the I think they call them idioms and things like that from the cultures that I grew up around were maybe not understood or misinterpreted here. And so there was a part of me that I had to pack away for a while until I learned how to reintegrate it in a way that made me feel better. You know what I mean? Maybe a way that made me feel safer. And I think you have to find your community a little bit to do that. And so it's been kind of a progression. The more that I've found community, people I trust, the more that I've been able to kind of be my full self again. But that's not something that came as naturally in Vermont for me that, as it did when I was in other places where there were a lot more people that looked like me. However, Vermont is changing now. I mean, I live in Brattleboro, and I go outside, and half my neighbors are BIPOC, and a lot of different people of color are all around the community. And so I know all of Vermont isn't reflective of that just yet, but it does give me some hope, and it allows me to keep doing the work here that I'm doing, because I really believe that the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing matters in the grand scheme of things.
Thank you. And that's a familiar theme and something that I really wasn't aware of for myself until recently, that not everybody is seeing the whole of me. That and it's we all lose, because not only are they seeing the whole of me, I'm not seeing the whole of them. And those ways of, I don't know, softening those barriers. So if you were to suggest something, make a proposal to your community, to Vermont, to our viewers, where your humanity is visible, your experiences are validated, and your contributions in the community are valued, what would that be?
So this is going to be a weird answer, but I would say start having meals together. Start having meals together. Almost all the service work that I did, and I have done, I have seen the power of food and a table bring people together and disarm people in a way that a lot of, more of our fancy work has not been able to. A lot of culture, pretty much everyone, um, has some sort of nostalgia around food. I don't want to overgeneralize, but in a way, and it reminds me of something that my conflict transformation teacher used to tell me all the time. His name was Tatsushi Arai, and he would say that conflict is not resolved at the boardroom table, but at the coffee table. And so for me, I really believe that, and I have seen the power of shared meals, right? Get a table out, go in the middle of a field somewhere, bring food, talk, disarm yourself, and get to know someone for who they are. And you might be surprised at not only how much you have in common, but at how good of a friend you might have made, or how good of a person you might be sitting next to or across from. That's going to take actually a little bit of courage to do, though, because there might be others in your community who might not want you to be talking to, I don't know, a person of color or the Black person who creates, some sort of trauma or drama or whatever. So, I mean, honestly, but but that's my honest answer. I think being able to have a meal together and start to reduce that anxiety is helpful.
I agree 100%. So, a couple of things. I'm originally from New York City, and they would have block parties. People would come out with a dish. There would be music and entertainment for the kids, and shut down the street, and a way to get to know your neighbors. And you're absolutely right. How many cultures are based around meals? We are at a fortunate time in Vermont where we have Soul Food Sunday. And I have had the pleasure of being to a couple down in Brattleboro where folks are coming together in community, getting to know each other, and sharing the past. I say I bring my ancestors to the table. It is maybe my version of the dishes, but isn't that what we're about? What we add to our culture, to our society. Before we wrap up, is there any last words you would like to share, or thoughts?
Yes, I actually would like to share a couple of words, and the main one being is that I really do believe that, like you were saying, our ancestors lived through us, and I think that because of the ways of the world, right, and the expectations that we have, sometimes we don't treat each other so nicely, and we forget about what our ancestors actually lived for and died for. And a lot of people's ancestries are based around good people who were trying to do what they thought was right to make a better world for themselves and others. And, maybe this is a therapist in me, right? But I'm hoping that everybody can listen to this interview or this conversation, really, and reflect a little bit on their own ancestors and what their family and lineages stood for, and then go out and try to do something for others that honors that. And get a little bit off of, I'm not saying anyone is, but get a little bit off of ourselves. There's so much concentration on me, but there's a whole world out there. And, if you only focus on yourself, well, you didn't, it's like, we all have to go sometime. And I don't want to look back and think, oh, I only worried about myself and what I had going on. I want to say that I did something else and I made more of an impact than that. So I would encourage others to maybe try to do the same. And I'm going to keep trying myself because I'm not perfect at it.
Practice makes progress. I want to thank you so much again, Steffen, for being my guest, for sharing your experience, for sharing your wisdom, for bringing the poem to our viewers. And I'd like to thank you, viewers, for watching I Am Vermont 2. Like us on Facebook.